Of course, the actual network card itself has effectively is acting as a support processor, because it'll be doing these days, and certainly here, it'll take the data, the packets that need to be sent. The CPU writes it into the memory on the card, and then the processor inside here, again, it's a dedicated one, will take the packets out there and be responsible for sending them out over the network connection again, rather than having to have the CPU wait for the network to be clear and sending the packets out over there and handling the collision detection for an Ethernet network, relieving the CPU of doing that. The CPU says send this packet, the network card then is doing the processing required to do that. And of course, these days again, your modern network card will do even more of the processing, so things like the checksums on the network packets are calculated off on the card itself, and even some of the TCP type protocol is implemented by the card rather than the CPU these days.
So it's a bit like having a dedicated butler who deals with all your network.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a good analogy. Do you run your house by you having to do everything that's in there, be responsible for cleaning it yourself, you could be responsible for managing the house and the things, or you could employ someone else to do it on your behalf. So you could employ a cleaner or someone to sort of clean the house rather than you having to do it yourself, as some people might choose to do. And it's the same with the computer. You can either have the main CPU do everything, from drawing the graphics on screen and doing things, and if it's fast enough, that's fine. Or it might say, actually, it's better if I can hand these tasks off to something else to do this, in the same way that we might say, actually, I'm no good at cleaning, I'm going to pay a cleaner to clean my house, or so on. Or I'm no good at being a builder, so I'm going to pay someone to build things.
Like in anything then, it's time versus money.
Well, yeah, to an extent. It's sort of, do you put it in software, which is effectively cost-free? You've got to pay someone to program it, but you can update it, you can change it, or do you bake it into the hardware and then it's fixed, unless you've got reprogrammable hardware, which you often get these days as well. Yes, I mean, if you're a Commodore 64 fan, like the chap behind the camera, then the disk drives. So an interesting example of this was the Commodore floppy disk drives, which actually had a CPU embedded inside them. So they had a 6502 CPU, just like the Commodore 64, which could then run the software to drive the disk drive and then shove that over effectively a serial connection back to the main C64, and it could communicate very, very slowly, by all accounts, unless you broke faster loaders back to the other machine. So they had a CPU again. But again, in general, people did, but in general, you wouldn't write software that ran on here. You'd write software that ran on the main processor and got this to do things for you. So it's sort of there to support things. We'll save that for another day, when I'll grab the camera and Sean can do the Commodore 64 video.